The call log showed 3 incoming lines at 2:43 a.m., all from the same number, all connected simultaneously, which shouldn't be possible. A landline can't generate 3 concurrent calls. The system doesn't allow it. But all 3 were answered by 3 different dispatchers at 3 different consoles, and all 3 callers said the same thing, word for word, the same voice, the same background sounds, the same request for help at the same address. 3 identical calls, same timestamp, same duration, same disconnect. When a supervisor pulled the recordings the next morning to review the redundancy, all 3 files played the same audio, exact synchronization, same waveform, same everything, like one call copied 3 times. But the dispatchers confirmed 3 different conversations, 3 different consoles, 3 different lines, all receiving the same transmission at the same moment. The address was checked. Responding units found nothing. No emergency. No resident matching caller's description. The number traced to a phone disconnected 6 months prior. And when technical services examined the system, looking for the glitch that allowed one number to occupy 3 lines simultaneously, they found no malfunction. The system had functioned correctly. It had received 3 calls from one source at one time and routed them appropriately. The issue wasn't the system. The issue was that it shouldn't have been possible. Dispatch work is built on constancy. Same room, same screens, same voices cycling through the same radio traffic. 8 hours, 10 hours, sometimes 12. You sit in one position, headset on, eyes on monitors, fingers on keyboards. The environment doesn't change. Fluorescent lights that never dim. Climate control that maintains exactly 68 degrees. The hum of equipment that becomes so constant you stop hearing it. After a while, you stop thinking of it as a workplace. It becomes more like a cockpit, a control center. You're not in a building. You're in a system, an interface between the physical world and the database that tracks it. Calls come in, you process them, enter data, assign resources, monitor outcomes. The work is abstract. You hear emergencies, but never see them. You dispatch help, but never witness arrival. Everything exists as voice and data, coordinates and descriptions, status updates and closure codes. And in that abstraction, you develop a different relationship with reality. What's real is what's documented. What's documented is what can be verified. And verification comes from a system. Officers confirm arrival, report findings, clear scenes. That's reality. Everything else is just information waiting to be verified, or disproven, or filed as unfounded. But the system is truth. The system doesn't lie. And when the system shows something that shouldn't exist, that creates a problem. Not a technical problem, a philosophical one. Because if the system is truth, and the system shows impossible things, then either the system is wrong, or impossible things are real. And no one wants to choose between those options. So the incidents get filed, noted, archived, and everyone agrees the system must have glitched, must have malfunctioned, because the alternative suggests that reality includes things the system was never designed to process, things that shouldn't exist in the framework of emergency services, things that generate calls, request help, provide information, but exist outside the boundaries of what's considered possible. And acknowledging that means questioning everything. Every call, every report, every piece of data, wondering if it's real or if it's something else, something that appears real, that sounds real, that processes through the system correctly, but originates from somewhere the system can't access, somewhere outside documented reality that a dispatcher in Winnipeg worked the overnight shift, solo operator, covering the city and surrounding region. It was a Tuesday in October, slow night. She'd taken maybe 15 calls in 6 hours. Routine traffic, medical assists, alarm activations, nothing significant. Around 3:30 a.m. a call came in. Female voice, older, calm, reported a fire, gave an address, residential structure, said she could see flames, could smell smoke, needed fire department immediately. The dispatcher confirmed the address, dispatched fire and police, asked if anyone was inside the structure. The caller said she didn't think so. said she was calling from across the street. The dispatcher asked her name. The caller provided it. Asked how long before help arrived. The dispatcher said units were 3 minutes out. Asked the caller to stay on the line. The caller said she would. The dispatcher monitored the response. Fire trucks acknowledged. Police acknowledged. ETA 2 minutes. She asked the caller if the fire was spreading. The caller said yes. Said it looked bad. Windows breaking. Smoke heavy. The dispatcher relayed this to responding units. They confirmed. Upgrading response. The dispatcher asked if the caller could see anyone near the building. The caller said no. Empty street. Just her watching. The dispatcher heard sirens through the phone. Asked if the caller could see the trucks. The caller said yes. Said they were arriving. Said thank God. The dispatcher said she could disconnect now. Units were on scene. The caller thanked her. Hung up. The dispatcher logged the call. Monitored radio traffic. Fire department reported on scene. Reported no fire. No smoke. No damage. Structure intact. No signs of emergency. They were doing a walk around. Checking for hidden fire. Checking for any indication. Nothing found. The dispatcher was confused. She just talked to a woman watching the fire. She'd heard the concern in her voice. The description had been detailed. Specific. She pulled up the call recording. Listened to it. Everything was there. The woman's voice. The address. The description. Background sounds consistent with outdoor environment. She radioed fire command. Asked if they were at the correct address. They confirmed. Right address. No fire. Never had been. The dispatcher asked them to check with neighbors. See if anyone had called. They did. Knocked on doors. No one had called. No one had seen fire. No one knew anything about it. The dispatcher checked the phone number. Landline. She called it back. A woman answered. Elderly voice. The dispatcher identified herself. Asked if she'd just called about a fire. The woman said no. Said she'd been asleep. The dispatcher apologized. Said there must be confusion. The woman asked if everything was okay. The dispatcher said yes. Wrong number. She disconnected. Pulled the recording again. Listened more carefully. The voice was the same. Same woman. She just talked to her. But the woman said she'd been asleep. Hadn't called. The dispatcher checked the address where the woman claimed to have been calling from. Across the street from the reported fire. She asked the unit to check. Verify who lived there. The unit confirmed. Elderly woman. Lives alone. They'd just spoken with her. She'd been confused about the fire trucks. Didn't know why they were there. Said she'd been sleeping. Hadn't heard anything. Hadn't called anything in. The dispatcher sat there, looking at her screen. The call had happened. It was recorded, logged, time-stamped. But the caller said it didn't happen. Said she'd been asleep, and no fire existed. Never had existed. She reported it to her supervisor at end of shift. Played the recording. Showed the call log. The supervisor listened. Reviewed the data. Said it was probably a prank. Someone spoofing the number. Making a false report. The dispatcher said the voice matched. She'd called the woman back. Same voice. The supervisor said voice matching isn't reliable. Said people sound similar, especially older women. Said prank calls happen. File it and move on. The dispatcher did. But she kept a copy of the recording because she knows what she heard, knows the detail in that report, knows the genuine concern in that voice. And she knows that voice matched when she called back. That the woman who said she'd been asleep had the same voice, the same speech patterns, the same cadence, like she'd made the call, then forgotten, or like she'd made it while sleeping. Some part of her consciousness calling in a fire she was dreaming about, seeing it clearly enough to describe, believing it real enough to report, then waking with no memory, no awareness, just confusion about emergency vehicles on her street. And the dispatcher wonders how often that happens. How often do people call in emergencies they're dreaming, report situations that exist only in sleep, provide detailed descriptions of things that aren't happening, and dispatch sends units, uses resources, responds to dream emergencies, while the callers sleep on, unaware they've contacted authorities, unaware they've triggered response, just dreaming, calling, reporting, all while unconscious, all while genuinely asleep, and no one knows, no one realizes. Because the calls sound real. The information sounds legitimate. The voices sound awake. And dispatch processes them like any other call. Because how would you know? How would you identify a sleeping caller, a dreaming reporter, someone providing information from a reality that only exists in their mind? You wouldn't. You couldn't. You just take the call, dispatch the units, and deal with the confusion when they arrive at nothing, at empty streets, at houses that aren't burning, at emergencies that never existed, except in sleep, except in dreams, except in the mind of someone who called for help while completely unconscious. The dispatcher requested day shift 6 months later, said she needed better sleep schedule. They accommodated. Emergency calls follow patterns. Medical emergencies peak in the morning. Domestic disturbances peak in the evening. Traffic incidents spike during commute hours. After 3 months, you know these patterns, can predict them, can anticipate call volume by time and day. But there are exceptions, calls that come at wrong times, from wrong locations, reporting wrong things. These anomalies stand out, get remembered, get discussed, and occasionally they repeat. Same anomaly, same time, same location. And the repetition creates a different kind of pattern, one that doesn't fit normal emergency patterns, that doesn't align with predictable human behavior. And dispatchers start recognizing these, start noting them privately, because officially noting them means documenting something weird, something unexplainable. And departments don't like unexplainable, don't want documentation that raises questions. So the notes stay private, stay informal, just awareness among dispatchers that certain calls repeat, certain addresses call at certain times, certain situations occur with suspicious regularity, and you prepare. You know when those calls come in what they're likely to say, what resources they'll need, what the outcome will probably be, not because you're psychic, but because it's happened before, multiple times, exactly the same way. And that repetition should indicate something, should point to a cause, should be investigable. But it's not, because investigating means acknowledging the pattern, means accepting that some emergencies aren't spontaneous, aren't random, aren't the result of normal circumstances. They're programmed somehow, scheduled, recurring on a timeline that doesn't relate to human activity, just occurring, automatically, generating calls, creating situations, requiring response, and then stopping. Until next time, until the schedule indicates it should happen again, and dispatch answers, sends units, processes it, like they always do, like they always will, because a call came in. The system received it, and response is mandatory, regardless of how many times it's happened before, regardless of how exactly it matches previous incidents. You respond, you document, you clear, and you wait for the next occurrence, the next scheduled repetition, the next call that shouldn't exist, but does. A dispatcher in Thunder Bay worked a rotation that included every third Sunday overnight, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. She'd been on that rotation for 2 years, and every third Sunday at 4:16 a.m., the same call came in, male voice, middle-aged, reporting a vehicle in the ditch. Highway 11. Kilometer marker 97. Single vehicle. No injuries visible. Driver still inside. Appeared unconscious. The dispatcher would take the information, dispatch police and ambulance, ask the caller's name and callback number. The caller would provide them. Different name each time, different number, but same voice, same report, same location. She started recognizing it by the third occurrence, started anticipating it by the fifth. By the 10th time, she had it memorized, could predict what he'd say before he said it. Units would respond. Find nothing. No vehicle. No accident. No caller. The kilometer marker was checked. Road was empty. Clear. No signs of any incident. This happened 17 times. Once every 3 weeks. Same day. Same time. Same report. Different caller identity each time. But same voice. After the 17th occurrence, she reported it to her supervisor. Showed him her personal log. The pattern. The consistency. The impossibility. Her supervisor checked official records. Confirmed the calls. confirmed the responses, confirmed no findings. He asked if she tried keeping the caller on the line, getting more information. She said yes, multiple times. The caller would describe the scene, answer questions, then say he had to go, disconnect. Every time, the supervisor said he'd have tech services look into it, see if the number could be traced. Tech services investigated. The numbers were always invalid, non-existent, never assigned, never registered, generated randomly, or spoofed. Either way, untraceable. The supervisor asked if she wanted to change rotations. She said no. She wanted to take the call next time, see if anything changed. 3 weeks later, 4:16 a.m. The call came in. Same voice, same report. She tried something different. Asked if he was the one who'd been calling, if he'd reported this before. The voice paused, said he didn't understand. She said this same accident, same location, same time, multiple times. Had he reported it before? The voice said no. First time he'd seen it. First time he called. Just trying to help. She didn't push. Took the report. Dispatched units. Same outcome. Nothing found. But something bothered her. The pause. The slight confusion in his voice. It had sounded genuine. Like he really didn't remember. Like each call was his first. Like every 3 weeks he encountered this same accident for the first time. Reported it sincerely. Then forgot. Or reset. Or returned to some state where it hadn't happened yet. And then 3 weeks later he'd encountered again. Fresh. New. For the first time. And call it in. Same details. Same concern. Same helpful citizen reporting an emergency. Never knowing he'd done it 16 times before. Never aware of the pattern. Just caught in some loop. Some cycle. Calling in the same accident. At the same time. Every 3 weeks. Forever. Or until someone figured out how to stop it. How to break the cycle. How to make him remember. Or make him stop seeing it. Either way, the calls continued. She kept taking them. Kept documenting them. Kept responding the same way. Because what else could she do? The call came in. The system received it. The procedure required response. So she responded. Every 3 weeks. At 4:16 a.m. same voice. Same accident. Same nothing found. It's been 3 years now. 52 calls. Same pattern. She's requested information. Requested investigation. Requested anything to explain it. Nothing has come. No answers. No explanations. Just the ongoing pattern. The scheduled, call the programmed response. And her sitting there, waiting, every third Sunday at 4:15, knowing in 1 minute the phone will ring, knowing what the voice will say, knowing what she'll do, knowing what the outcome will be, and doing it anyway, because that's dispatch. You answer. You respond. You process. Even when you know, even when you've known for years, even when the call is impossible, even when the caller shouldn't exist. You answer. You respond. And you wait for next time. The last time she tried to break pattern and refused to dispatch units. The call came in on a different console. Same voice. Different dispatcher took it. Units were sent. Same outcome. There's a database. Shared between agencies. It tracks persistent issues. Addresses that generate excessive calls. Phone numbers associated with false reports. Individuals who abuse emergency services. The database helps identify patterns. Allows dispatchers to prepare, to anticipate, to make informed decisions about resource allocation. But there's an unofficial section, not documented in the system manual, not included in training, just entries that get added, that accumulate over years, entries that don't fit normal categories, phone numbers that only connect during certain hours, addresses that only exist on certain dates, callers who provide information they shouldn't have. These entries don't get purged, don't get investigated, just stay in the database, growing, accumulating, creating a map of anomalies, a documentation of things dispatch encounters that don't fit elsewhere. And experienced dispatchers know to check these, know to search the unofficial entries when something feels wrong, when a call doesn't sit right, when information seems impossible. And usually there's a match. Someone else has encountered it. Someone else has documented it. Someone else has added the entry. And that provides comfort, not explanation, not solution, Just confirmation that you're not alone, that others have experienced it, that the strangeness you're feeling has been felt before and will probably be felt again, because these entries don't get resolved, don't get closed. Just stay active, stay present, stay waiting for the next occurrence, the next dispatcher who'll encounter them, who'll add their own notes, their own observations, their own confirmation that yes, this is real, this keeps happening, this exists. In whatever form it exists, whatever reality it occupies, it's real enough to generate calls, real enough to require response, real enough to be documented, even if unofficially, even if only in entries that shouldn't exist, in a database section that isn't acknowledged, but is known, is used, is maintained by people who need to know they're not imagining things, not losing objectivity, not seeing patterns that don't exist. The patterns exist. The database confirms it. And that's enough. Has to be enough. Because explanation isn't coming. Understanding isn't available. Just documentation. Just record. Just a growing archive of strangeness that dispatch encounters. Every shift. Every day. Forever. A dispatcher in Halifax worked weekday nights. Monday through Friday. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. She handled an average sector. Urban core and surrounding neighborhoods. Standard call volume for a city that size. One particular address came up regularly. Apartment building. 12 stories. Mixed demographic. Every month there were calls from that address. Sometimes medical. Sometimes domestic. Sometimes noise complaints. Normal urban building activity. But there was one apartment that called differently. Unit 704. When calls came from that unit, the caller would request help, describe a situation. Then, before dispatch could get full details, the line would go dead. Not hung up, just dead. Every time, the dispatcher would call back. No answer. She'd dispatch units for welfare check. They'd respond. Knock on the door. No answer. They'd contact building management. Enter the apartment. Empty. Unoccupied. Furniture minimal. No tenant. No lease. Unit was vacant. This happened 6 times before the dispatcher noted the pattern. Started tracking it. Same unit. Same call pattern. Same outcome. She checked the phone company records. The number associated with Unit 704 was disconnected. Had been for 8 months. But calls kept coming from it. She reported this to her supervisor. They contacted the phone company. Requested investigation. Phone company confirmed. Line disconnected. No service. No ability to make calls. But dispatch kept receiving them. Phone company sent a technician. Physically checked the line. Disconnected at the building junction. No physical connection. No way for that line to carry signal. But 2 days later, another call came in. Same unit. Same pattern. Same deadline. Same empty apartment. The dispatcher started documenting differently. Started recording everything about these calls. Time. Duration. Exact words spoken. Background sounds. Caller characteristics. After 12 occurrences, she had significant data. She compiled it. Presented it to her supervisor. Requested formal investigation. The supervisor reviewed it. Acknowledged the pattern. Said he'd escalate. 2 weeks later, he called her into his office. Said they'd investigated thoroughly. Said the phone company had no explanation. Said building management confirmed Unit 704 had been vacant for 11 months. Said police had checked it multiple times. Always empty. Always secure. Said technical services had examined dispatch equipment. No faults. No glitches. Everything functioning correctly. Said they were filing it as unexplained technical phenomenon. Closing investigation. Recommended she just continue processing the calls normally. The dispatcher asked what normally meant. The supervisor said take the report. Dispatch units. Let them clear it as unfounded. Same as always. She asked what the callers were saying. What they were requesting help for. The supervisor checked his notes. Said different things. Different emergencies. But always incomplete. Always cut off. She asked if he'd listened to the recordings. He said yes. All of them. She asked what he thought. He was quiet for a moment. Then said he thought someone was calling from that apartment. Someone who needed help. But someone who wasn't physically present. At least not in a way responding units could detect. She asked what that meant. He said he didn't know. Said maybe the calls were residual. Maybe something had happened in that unit. Something that left an impression, that kept repeating, kept calling out, kept requesting help that couldn't arrive in time. Or maybe it was something else. Something using the disconnected line, the empty apartment, the gap in normal reality, using it to call, to reach out, to try to communicate. He said either way, there was nothing dispatch could do, except answer, except respond, except document that someone keeps calling, keeps asking for help, even though no one's there, even though the line is disconnected, even though the apartment is empty. The calls keep coming, and dispatch keeps answering, because that's the job. You answer every call, respond to every request, even when the caller shouldn't exist, even when the call shouldn't be possible, even when responding means sending units to nothing, to emptiness, to absence. You still respond, because maybe next time will be different. Maybe next time there'll be something there, somewhere. Maybe next time help will arrive in time for whoever keeps calling, whoever keeps requesting, whoever keeps reaching out from Unit 704. The dispatcher still works that shift, still takes those calls. They happen less frequently now, once every 2 months, once every 3, but they still happen. Same pattern, same disconnection, same empty apartment. She processes them the same way, takes the partial report, dispatches units, logs the outcome, and waits for the next call, the next attempt, the next voice asking for help from somewhere between connected and disconnected, between occupied and vacant, between present and absent, still calling, still trying, still hoping someone will answer. Building management sealed Unit 704 18 months ago, welded the door shut, said it was for renovation. The renovations never started. The calls continue. Some emergency numbers get blocked after repeated false reports, after verified abuse, after patterns of misuse. The system flags them, restricts them, prevents them from accessing emergency services except through alternative verification. It's rare, but it happens. Protects resources, prevents waste. But there are numbers that should be blocked but aren't. Numbers that call repeatedly, report situations that never exist, provide information that's always wrong, but never get blocked. Because blocking requires human authorization, requires review, requires acknowledgement that the number is problematic. And some numbers don't get that acknowledgement. Because reviewing them means examining the calls closely, means listening to recordings, means processing the content. And some content resists processing, not because it's disturbing, because it's nonsensical, because it doesn't fit categories, because the words are English, but the meaning isn't. The grammar is correct, but the substance isn't. It's like listening to generated speech, random words in proper syntax, creating sentences that sound right but mean nothing, or mean something that can't be understood. And dispatchers who take these calls try to process them, try to extract meaning, try to identify what's being reported, but can't. The caller sounds human, the speech sounds normal, but the content is void, is empty, is absence pretending to be information. And these calls don't get blocked because you can't document the problem, can't explain what's wrong, can't justify blocking based on the calls don't make sense. So they continue, keep coming in, keep getting answered, keep wasting time while dispatchers try to understand, try to help, try to extract actionable information from noise, from void, from carefully structured meaninglessness. And eventually they disconnect, frustrated, confused, having accomplished nothing, having helped no one, having processed error. And the number remains active, remains callable, remains able to access emergency services, to waste resources, to create confusion, for purposes unknown, for reasons that can't be understood, just calling, speaking, saying nothing, forever. A dispatcher in Regina handled a call at 1:30 a.m. mail caller, reported needing assistance. She asked what type. He said immediate. She asked what the emergency was. He said temporal. She asked him to clarify. He said the duration was inadequate. She asked the duration of what? He said the interval. She asked what interval. He said between. She asked between what? He said, occurrence. She tried different approach, asked his location. He provided coordinates. She asked for a street address. He said the coordinates were sufficient. She asked what type of assistance he needed. He said restoration. She asked restoration of what? He said continuity. She tried again, asked if he was injured. He said not physically. She asked if someone else was injured. He said not yet. She asked what he meant by not yet. He said the sequence hadn't completed. She was getting frustrated. Asked him to explain clearly what emergency he was reporting. He was quiet for a moment, then said he was reporting discontinuity. She asked what that meant. He said the break, the gap, the absence of connection between preceding and following. She said she didn't understand. He said he understood that. Said most couldn't. Said the structure prevented recognition. She asked what structure. He said consciousness. Said it filtered. Said it smoothed. Said it created apparent continuity where gaps existed. She asked him to hold. Flagged her supervisor. The supervisor listened on another headset. The caller continued. Said dispatch existed at the boundary. Said it interfaced. Said it received reports from both sides. Said most came from the continuous side, from the smooth side, from the structure side, but occasionally calls came from the gaps, from the breaks, from the places between. And those calls were difficult because the callers existed differently, experienced differently, reported differently, and understanding required stepping outside structure, outside filtering, outside the consciousness that prevented recognition. The supervisor disconnected the call, asked the dispatcher if she was okay. She said yes, confused, but okay. He said the call was someone having a mental health crisis, probably drugs, probably psychosis, but no actual emergency, no need for response. She asked if they should send medical. He said no, no location, no actionable information, just document it and move on. She did, but the call bothered her, not because it was strange, because parts of it made sense, not logical sense, but recognition sense, like something she almost understood, something familiar but inaccessible, like a word on the tip of her tongue, a concept just beyond grasp. And that almost understanding was worse than not understanding at all, because it suggested the caller was communicating something real, something true, something about the nature of emergency services, about dispatch, about the role of answering calls, about existing at the boundary between normal and not, between continuous and broken, between structured reality and whatever exists in the gaps. And she didn't want to think about that, didn't want to consider it, didn't want to acknowledge that maybe some calls come from places that aren't places, from times that aren't times, from versions of reality that exist in the breaks, in the gaps, in the discontinuities, and dispatch answers them, processes them, tries to help, because the call came in, because someone reached out, even if that someone exists between, even if their emergency is ontological, even if their need is for restoration of continuity that consciousness normally provides automatically. You still answer, still try to help, still exist at the boundary, receiving reports from both sides, from all sides, from sides that shouldn't exist, but do, and call, and request, and need. The number called back 3 weeks later. Different dispatcher. Same content. Same meaningless meaning. The supervisor blocked it after that. Officially listed reason. Repeated prank calls. The night dispatch supervisor position exists for oversight, quality control, handling escalations. But mostly it exists for the calls that don't fit, the situations that require judgment beyond procedure. And at night, those situations occur more frequently because night calls are different. Night callers are different. The boundaries are different. And sometimes a call comes in that's clearly not appropriate for standard processing, not dangerous, not criminal, just wrong. And the dispatcher needs authorization to handle it differently, to deviate from protocol, to acknowledge that normal response isn't appropriate. That's when the supervisor gets involved, listens, assesses, makes a call. Usually, it's straightforward. Medical crisis routed differently. Jurisdictional issue requiring transfer. Resource limitation requiring prioritization. Standard supervisory decisions. But occasionally, the supervisor has to make a different kind of call, has to decide that a situation isn't real, isn't happening, isn't something that should receive response, not because the caller is lying, but because the situation being reported exists in a category that emergency services don't address, can't address, aren't equipped to address. These decisions don't have official documentation, don't have procedure, don't have guidelines, just supervisor judgment, based on experience, based on intuition, based on the accumulated knowledge that some calls report things that fall outside the mandate, outside the scope, outside the reality that emergency services operate in. And the supervisor says no, no dispatch, no response, no documentation beyond the call log, because sending units would be pointless, would waste resources, would put personnel in contact with something that shouldn't be contacted. That's better left alone, better ignored, better allowed to resolve on its own, or not resolve. Either way, not the responsibility of emergency services. And these decisions are made quietly, without announcement, without explanation, just no dispatch. Call closed, move on. And the dispatchers learn over time that some calls end that way, that sometimes the supervisor will listen and say no. And you trust that. Trust the judgment. Trust that someone with more experience has determined this isn't something to respond to. And you move on, take the next call, process normally, and try not to think about what the supervisor heard that made them decide some calls aren't for helping. Some calls are for ignoring. Some situations are better left alone. A dispatcher escalated a call at 3:45 a.m. Caller reported being trapped. Location given was a residence, single-family home. Caller said they couldn't get out, said the doors wouldn't open, windows wouldn't open, said they'd been trying for hours. The dispatcher asked if they were alone. Caller said yes. The dispatcher asked if there was a medical emergency. Caller said no, just trapped. The dispatcher said she'd send help, asked the caller to stay on the line. The caller agreed. The dispatcher flagged her supervisor, explained the situation. The supervisor listened to the call, asked several questions. How long had the caller been trapped? Since waking up. When had they woken up? Hours ago. Had they tried all exits? Yes. Had they tried breaking windows? Yes. Wouldn't break. Had they called anyone else? No. Just emergency services. The supervisor asked to speak with the caller. The dispatcher transferred. The supervisor identified himself, asked the caller to describe their situation more specifically. The caller did, said they woke up around midnight. Normal bedroom, normal house, but couldn't open the bedroom door. Tried the windows, wouldn't budge. Eventually got the bedroom door open through sustained effort. But then the other doors wouldn't open. Front door, back door, garage, all stuck. Tried breaking a window with a chair. The chair wouldn't impact the glass. Just stopped before contact, like hitting an invisible barrier. The supervisor asked if they tried calling family, friends. The caller said their phone would only dial emergency services. Other numbers wouldn't connect. The supervisor asked if they had food, water. The caller said yes. Kitchen was accessible. Utilities worked. Just couldn't exit the house. The supervisor asked if anything else was unusual. The caller hesitated, then said time seemed wrong. Said they'd been awake for what felt like hours. The clock said only minutes had passed. Said they'd eaten breakfast. Felt like hours ago. But kitchen clock showed no time had passed. The supervisor was quiet for a long moment, then asked if the caller was sure they were awake. The caller said yes, definitely awake. This was real. The supervisor said he understood. Said he'd reviewed the situation. Said emergency services couldn't help. The caller said what did that mean? The supervisor said the situation described was outside their operational scope. Said they couldn't dispatch units, couldn't provide assistance. The caller said they were trapped. The supervisor said he understood. Said emergency services responded to physical emergencies, medical, fire, criminal. Said what the caller was describing was a different category. The caller asked what category. The supervisor said he couldn't name it. Said there wasn't official terminology. Said some situations fell outside the framework emergency services operated in. Said this appeared to be one. The caller started to protest. The supervisor interrupted. Said his recommendation was to stop trying to exit. Said accept the situation. Said wait. Said usually these resolved on their own. Given time, given patience, given acceptance. The caller asked how he knew that. The supervisor said experience. Said this wasn't the first call like this. Wouldn't be the last. Said the best outcome came from waiting, not forcing, not panicking, just existing in the situation until it concluded. The caller asked how long. The supervisor said he couldn't say. Could be hours, could be days, could be subjective time that didn't correspond to clock time. But eventually the doors would open, the windows would break, the phone would call other numbers, and they'd be able to exit normally, like nothing had happened. The caller was silent. The supervisor asked if they understood. The caller said yes, said they'd wait. The supervisor thanked them, disconnected, returned the call to the dispatcher, said no dispatch necessary. Situation would self-resolve. The dispatcher asked if he was sure. He said yes, said log it as caller declined service after consultation. She did. The call was closed. 2 days later, the dispatcher saw a follow-up flag. The same number had called back. Different dispatcher. Said they were calling to report they were no longer trapped, that everything was back to normal, that they wanted to thank the supervisor who'd talked them through it. The dispatcher had told them there was no official record of emergency services being involved. The call had been logged as declined service. The caller had seemed confused, but accepted this. Thanked them anyway. Disconnected. The dispatcher read this note. Asked her supervisor about it. He said some situations require unofficial intervention, require advice that isn't documented, require acknowledgement of realities that aren't official. He said the caller had been trapped, really trapped, but not physically, not in a way that could be addressed through physical means. They'd been trapped in a state, a condition, a version of their home that existed temporarily, that would resolve when certain internal factors aligned, when the person stopped resisting, stopped trying to force their way out, just accepted and waited, and giving them that information, that guidance, that understanding, that helped, that allowed resolution, even though officially it never happened, even though the log showed declined service. The actual service was provided. The actual help was given, just not in a way that could be documented, not in a way that fit procedure, not in a way that acknowledged what was really happening. The dispatcher asked how many calls like that he'd handled. He said dozens, over 15 years, maybe one per month, sometimes more, sometimes less. People trapped in situations that weren't physical, that required different intervention, that needed someone to tell them it's okay, that this happens, that waiting works, that resistance makes it worse. And those calls don't get normal response, don't get units dispatched, don't get documented fully, just get handled quietly, get resolved unofficially, get closed as if nothing happened, because officially nothing did. Officially, emergency services weren't involved. Officially, no help was provided. But unofficially, quietly, in ways that leave no record, help is given, understanding is shared, and people get free, get released, get returned to normal, even though officially they were never trapped, even though officially the call was declined, even though officially nothing unusual occurred. The work still happens. The help still arrives, just through channels that don't exist, through responses that aren't documented, through a system within the system that handles what can't officially be handled. And the dispatcher asked if she'd be expected to recognize these calls, to handle them appropriately. The supervisor said she'd learn, said after enough time, after enough exposure to night shift, after enough calls that didn't quite fit, she'd developed the sense, the recognition, the understanding of when a call was reporting something that required different handling. And she'd escalate, and he'd listen, and he'd make the call. And together they'd provide help that officially didn't happen, service that officially wasn't rendered, intervention that officially couldn't exist, because some emergencies aren't in the manual, aren't in the training, aren't in the scope of documented services. But there's still emergencies, still require response, still need someone to answer, someone to help, someone to exist at that boundary between what's official and what's real, between what can be documented and what actually happens, between the emergency services that exist on paper and the emergency services that exist at 3 a.m. when the calls come from places that aren't quite places, from situations that aren't quite situations, from people who need help that isn't quite help, but is help nonetheless. The dispatcher said she understood. The supervisor said good, said she'd do fine, said most people couldn't handle night dispatch long-term, couldn't maintain the balance between procedure and reality, between documentation and truth, between what the system said happened and what actually occurred. But those who could, those who learned, those who developed the sense, they became valuable, became necessary, became the ones who kept the real system functioning, the system beneath the system, the network beneath the network, the service beneath the service, that answered the calls that shouldn't exist, that responded to emergencies that couldn't be real, that helped people who were experiencing things that officially weren't possible. And that work mattered more than the documented work, more than the official responses, more than the calls that fit procedure. Because those calls were easy. Those situations had protocols. Those emergencies had solutions. But the others, the ones that didn't fit, the ones that reported impossible things, the ones that came from between, those needed someone who could handle them, who could recognize them, who could respond appropriately, even if that response was sometimes no response, sometimes just listening, sometimes just acknowledging, sometimes just telling someone it's okay. This happens. Wait out. You'll be fine. And that was enough. That was the help. That was the service. Even though officially it never happened. She's been night dispatch supervisor for 4 years now. Makes the same kinds of calls, the same kinds of decisions, handles the same kinds of situations that officially don't exist. There's a file, physical file, not digital, kept in the supervisor's desk. Locked drawer. It contains printouts, call logs, transcripts, notes, all related to calls that don't fit, that reported things that shouldn't be possible, that came from places that shouldn't exist, that describe situations that violate understood reality. The file started decades ago. First supervisor to keep it did so for personal reference. Documentation of the strange, the unusual, the impossible. Over the years it grew. Each supervisor added to it, contributed their encounters, their experiences, their documentation of calls that couldn't officially be documented. Now it's hundreds of pages, organized chronologically, cross-referenced by type, indexed by characteristics. It's become a manual, an unofficial guide, a reference for handling situations that have no official handling procedure. New supervisors are shown the file, told its purpose, told its importance, told to add to it, contribute their own experiences, help build the knowledge base. Because these situations keep happening, these calls keep coming, and having documentation, having reference, having evidence that others encountered similar things, that helps, that provides context, that confirms you're not losing objectivity, not imagining patterns, not seeing impossibility where there's rational explanation. The file proves it, shows it, documents it, call after call, year after year, situation after situation. Things that shouldn't happen, but do. Things that shouldn't be possible, but are. Things that shouldn't exist, but call emergency services. Request help. Provide information from locations that don't exist, at times that don't make sense. Reporting emergencies that violate physics, that violate logic, that violate the basic assumptions about how reality functions. And the file contains them all, contains the responses, contains the outcomes, contains the accumulated wisdom about how to handle impossibility, how to process unreality, how to provide service when the situation being served shouldn't exist. It's the real manual, the actual training document, the true guide to night dispatch. Because the official manual covers normal, covers standard, covers what should happen. But the file covers what does happen, what actually occurs, what really comes through the lines, at 3 a.m., at 4 a.m., at the hours when normal people sleep and unusual things call for help. And the file keeps growing, keeps accumulating, keeps documenting, because the calls never stop. The situations never stop occurring. The impossible never stops requesting service. And dispatch keeps answering, keeps responding, keeps adding to the file, page after page, call after call, forever. A dispatcher requested to see the file after her 6th month on night shift. She'd been handling calls that bothered her, calls that didn't make sense, calls where the information provided seemed impossible. Her supervisor agreed, unlocked the drawer, handed her the file, told her to read it in the break room. Take her time. She did. Started at the beginning. Worked forward chronologically. The early entries were sparse. Just dates and brief descriptions. Caller reported being in 2 places simultaneously. Caller provided information about events that hadn't occurred yet. Caller described seeing things that weren't visible. As the years progressed, the entries became more detailed. Included transcripts. Included response protocols. Included outcomes. She read about callers who reported temporal loops, who said they'd been making the same call repeatedly, who described being stuck in recurring moments, who needed help breaking cycles. She read about callers who reported spatial impossibilities, who said they were inside buildings that shouldn't contain the spaces they described, who said they'd been walking through their homes for hours without finding exits, who described rooms that led to other rooms in sequences that couldn't physically exist. She read about callers who reported identity confusion, who said they were someone else, who said they remembered being different people, who said they existed in multiple versions simultaneously, who needed help determining which version was real. She read about callers who reported communication with things that shouldn't communicate, who said they were receiving messages, who said things were speaking to them, who said they needed help understanding what was being communicated. She read for 3 hours, went through maybe a third of the file, had to stop, had to process, went back to her console, sat there, staring at the screens. Everything looked the same equipment, the same displays, the same incoming call indicators. But now she knew what some of those calls might be, knew what she might hear, knew what she was really doing, sitting at the boundary, waiting for calls from impossible places, reporting impossible things, requesting impossible help. And she'd answer, she'd respond, she'd process, because that was the job, the real job, not the official job, not the job described in the manual, the actual job, the one that mattered, answering everything, responding to everything, helping everyone, regardless of whether they should exist, regardless of whether their situation should be possible, regardless of whether their emergency fit within understood reality. They called. That made them real enough to answer, real enough to help, real enough to document. In the file, in the unofficial manual, in the growing archive of impossibility that dispatch maintained, that dispatch served, that dispatch existed to interface with. She worked the rest of her shift differently, more aware, more alert, more prepared, waiting for the call that would make sense, the situation that couldn't exist, the emergency that violated reality. And 3 hours before end of shift, it came. Female caller, calm voice, said she needed to report something. The dispatcher asked what. The caller said she was calling about herself. The dispatcher asked her to clarify. The caller said she was calling to report her own emergency, said she needed help, but she was the one calling. Was that allowed? The dispatcher said yes, of course. What was the emergency? The caller said she didn't know how to describe it, said she wasn't where she should be, said she wasn't when she should be, said she was calling from a phone that shouldn't work, from a place that shouldn't exist, from a time that shouldn't be accessible, but she could make the call, could reach emergency services. So she was calling, was reporting, was requesting help, even though she didn't know what help looked like, didn't know what response was appropriate, just knew she needed to call, needed to report, needed to reach out. The dispatcher flagged her supervisor. He listened, asked the caller several questions, verified certain details, then told the dispatcher to log it. Standard format. Location unknown. Situation unclear. Declined service after consultation. The dispatcher did. The supervisor took over the call. Spoke with the caller. Quietly, calmly. The dispatcher couldn't hear what he said, but the call lasted 15 minutes. When it ended, the supervisor returned to his office. The dispatcher continued her shift. At end of shift, she asked about the call. The supervisor said it was handled. Said the caller had been helped, not through dispatch, not through units, just through conversation, through acknowledgement, through confirmation that yes, what they were experiencing was real, was known, was something that happened. And knowing that, having that confirmed, that was the help. That was the service. That was what emergency services could provide. Not rescue, not intervention, just confirmation, just acknowledgement, just someone answering, someone saying, yes, I hear you, I believe you, this is real. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's all that's needed. Someone on the other end, someone who doesn't question, someone who doesn't doubt, someone who just accepts the call, accepts the situation, accepts the impossible, and provides what help they can, even if that help is just listening, just being there, just answering. The dispatcher understood. She'd read the file. She knew this was dispatch. This was the work. This was what happened at night, when the boundaries weakened, when impossible things needed help, when calls came from places that shouldn't exist. You answered. You listened. You helped. However you could, whatever that meant, whoever was calling, from wherever they were calling from, you answered. Always. Every time. Forever. She added an entry to the file at the end of her shift. Her first contribution. It would not be her last. The call came in at 2:58 a.m. The dispatcher answered. Standard greeting. Identified the service. Asked about the emergency. There was silence. Not deader. Presence. Someone there. Not speaking. The dispatcher asked if anyone needed help. More silence. She waited. Protocol was 30 seconds. Give the caller time. Sometimes people were scared. Sometimes injured. Sometimes unable to speak immediately. She counted internally. At 20 seconds, she heard something. Breathing. Faint. Distant. She asked again if someone was there, if they needed help. The breathing continued. Steady. Unchanging. At 30 seconds, she prepared to disconnect. Standard procedure. But something made her wait. Something about the quality of the silence. The way the breathing sounded. Not frightened. Not injured. Just present. She asked a different question. Asked if the caller could hear her. The breathing changed. Became slightly faster. Like response. Like acknowledgement. She said, if you can hear me, but can't speak, stay on the line. I'll try to help. The breathing maintained a faster pace. She interpreted that as confirmation. She asked if this was a medical emergency. The breathing slowed. Returned to original pace. She interpreted that as no. She asked if someone was preventing them from speaking. Same response. Slow breathing. No. She tried different questions, different approaches. Each time, the breathing would change. Faster for yes. Slower for no. Or what she interpreted as yes and no. She wasn't certain, but it felt like communication, like someone trying to respond, using the only method available. She asked if they were in danger. The breathing became irregular, like confusion, like the question didn't apply. She tried again, asked if they needed police, fire, medical. Each time, irregular breathing, like none of those were appropriate. She asked if they needed her to stay on the line. The breathing became faster. Strong yes, clear yes. She said, okay, I'll stay. I won't disconnect. The breathing stabilized, maintained steady pace. She sat there, headset on, listening to breathing. For 2 minutes. 3. She checked her screen. The call was still connected, still active. Number showed as unavailable. Location showed as unknown. Standard for some cell phones. Some VoIP services. 5 minutes passed. She asked if they were still there. The breathing confirmed. Still present. She said, I don't know how to help you. I don't know what you need. The breathing changed. Became patterns. Not speech. Not words. But rhythmic. Like Morse code. Like intentional communication. She didn't understand it, didn't know what it meant. She said, "I don't understand. Can you try something else?" The breathing returned to steady, like giving up, like accepting she couldn't decode it. She felt frustrated. Someone was reaching out. Someone needed something, but she couldn't determine what. Couldn't provide help. Could only listen. Could only maintain connection. She said, "I'm sorry, I can't understand. But I'm here. I'm listening. I won't disconnect until you want to." The breathing changed again. Slower. Deeper. Like relief. Like that was enough. Like just having someone there. Someone listening. Someone not disconnecting. That was the help. That was what they needed. She sat there. Continued listening. 10 minutes. 15. Other calls came in. Other dispatchers handled them. She stayed on her call. Maintained connection. At 20 minutes, the breathing began to fade. Gradually, getting quieter. Getting more distant. Like the caller was moving away. Or like the connection was weakening. She said, "Are you still there?" The breathing was barely audible. Almost gone. She said, "I'm here. I'm still here." The breathing faded completely. The line went silent. True silence. Deader. She waited another minute, then disconnected. Logged the call. Duration, 22 minutes. Nature of call unknown. Disposition unclear. Service provided unknown. She sat there, staring at her screen. She just spent 22 minutes listening to breathing. To someone who couldn't speak, who couldn't explain, who just needed someone to listen, someone to stay, someone to not disconnect. And she'd done that. She provided that. Was that help? Was that emergency services? Was that appropriate use of resources? She didn't know, but the caller had needed it, had communicated that through breathing, through the only method available. And she'd stayed. She'd listened. She'd helped. However minimal, however strange, however outside normal protocol. She'd answered the call. She'd responded to the need. She'd provided service. And the call was over now. The breathing was gone. The connection was ended. But somewhere someone had been helped, had been heard, had been acknowledged for 22 minutes in the middle of the night by a dispatcher who didn't disconnect, who stayed, who listened, who answered. The call would not appear in any report, would not be reviewed by any supervisor, would not be counted in any metric. It would exist only in the log. One line, 22 minutes, unknown disposition, and in the dispatcher's memory, the sound of breathing, steady, present, real, reaching out, being answered, being heard, for as long as necessary, for as long as the connection lasted, for as long as someone was there, on both ends, connected, communicating, however imperfectly, however strangely, however impossibly, still connected, still present, still real, until the breathing faded, until the line went silent, until the call ended, and both sides returned to wherever they existed, having been together, briefly, through the line, through the connection, through the service that exists for everyone, everything, always, as long as someone answers, as long as someone stays, as long as dispatch continues, taking calls from everywhere, from everything, from anywhere that can reach the number, can make the connection, can send the signal that someone needs, that someone's there, that someone hears. Answer, listen, help. That's dispatch. That's the service. That's what happens. Every night, every call, every time, someone reaches out. Someone answers. Connection is made. However briefly, however strangely, however impossibly, the line stays open. The call continues. Until it doesn't. Until it ends. Until silence returns. And both sides wait for the next call, the next connection, the next voice reaching through distance, through darkness, through whatever separates caller from dispatcher, from need from response, from question from answer. The line stays open. The system stays active. The service continues, forever, waiting, ready, always, to answer. Whatever calls, from wherever, from whenever, from whoever, or whatever, can dial the number, can reach the line, can connect, and speak, or breathe, or exist, in whatever form, through whatever medium, however impossible, however strange, however real. The call comes in, someone answers, the line stays open, until it doesn't, until it ends. Until next time, when it happens again, as it always does, as it always will, forever.